All right. Well, it is 6:30 and people will probably still kind of trickle in, but to maximize time and make sure that I give you as much time as I can, I'm going to go ahead and get started, April Lynn. So before we get to the presentation, I just wanted to say good evening. Thank you for joining us for our Magic Rules panel. We have some really cool prizes to give out to you tonight, so make sure you stick to the end, and we will draw at random who wins. Our first one is a signed Teen Titans poster, a copy of Surfside Girls, a graphic novel by tomorrow's presenter, Kim Dwinell, and a copy of April Lynn's book Shatter, which is part of her Glitter series, which I'm sure she'll talk about a little bit tonight. Last night we gave away your copy of Glitter, so tonight we're giving away the sequel. So tonight I have the pleasure to introduce our panelist, New York Times bestselling author, April Lynn Pike. She's written many awesome young adult series such as Wings, Glitter, Life After Theft, and so much more. I've had the pleasure of meeting April Lynn at some library conferences, and you're all in for a delightful presentation. So without further ado, April Lynn, I'm handing it over to you.
All right, we're gonna see if we can make this work. Okay, do you guys see a PowerPoint?
I do not. It was working earlier.
I forgot to click the share button.
That would be helpful.
And I'm gonna
all right, you see it now. All right, we are.
Awesome. All right, so I've titled this one Magic Rules, and that's mostly what it's going to be about. Like she said, my name is April Lynn Pike, and I always make my husband write my intro because he'll put all the braggy things in it and I won't. So I am a #1 New York Times and internationally best-selling, critically acclaimed author. My books have been translated into over 30 languages in more than 50 countries and have been optioned for both film and television. But more importantly, for presentations like this, I have a bachelor's degree in creative writing. I have written 12 books that span 3 different series and 2 standalones for the national market. I've worked with 5 different editors at 3 different publishers over the course of, oh boy, that number is old, over the course of 12 years. And all of my books are for teens. So here's a couple of them. I will say that I have been extremely lucky with my covers. You can see they're all really, really beautiful. A lot of people don't know that authors don't have very much say in their covers, especially not early in their career. So they just have to pray to the cover gods and hope that things turn out well. And I've been very, very lucky. So these are my pretties. There they are for you. So this is about magic and different kinds of magic. And so some of the things that I've written about are fairies, trolls, oracles, time travelers, cursed gods, ghosts, and futuristic technology, which ends up being a lot more like magic, only with tech. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit in the second half of this presentation. So I did not make this. I found it online several years ago, and I did not find out who made it. So if anybody knows who made it, I would love to give them credit, but I don't know who made it. I love Venn diagrams, see how different things overlap. So this is a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight. A lot of it is going to be fantasy, but some of it is going to be sci-fi. Some of it is going to be high fantasy. Some of it is going to be low fantasy. And those two terms get thrown around a lot, but I think they often get thrown around in the wrong way. High fantasy just means in a different world that isn't Earth, or isn't even in our reality. So like the Lord of the Rings is high fantasy. Low fantasy is set in this world, so something like Harry Potter, but we think of high and low as like good and bad, and that's not what it means in this case. It just means set in this reality or set in a completely other reality. So those are some of the kinds of fantasy. On the other side, we have sci-fi, and we have hard sci-fi, which is going to be, super technology. There's going to be usually no supernatural element, like Space Odyssey. For example, Star Wars is not hard sci-fi because there's a supernatural element in there with the Force and such. You have things like cyberpunk and steampunk, diesel punk. Where they overlap, you have things like space opera, which is what Star Wars technically is. You have books like Dune and The Dark Tower. And then in there, often with the supernatural and sci-fi, we have a little bit of the horror, which my Sleep No More series kind of fits into. It's kind of a supernatural horror thriller-ish. And so horror can also span into the sci-fi. And then way down there with the little heart, we have romance, which can also fit in anywhere. It's like a little heart cookie cutter that can go anywhere, because we all know that kissing can totally go into any book, anytime, anywhere. That's pretty much my rule. All right, so we're going to start out by playing a game, which is what people who don't read about magic books think about magic books. I don't know if any of you guys have ever told people that you like to read fantasy, especially grown-up people. And when I tell these grown-up people that I write fantasy, they all make this face. Like, oh, you write the books where you wave a magic wand and it fixes all the problems. And so that's what people who don't read about magic books think that magic books are, is that magic is a way to fix a problem without actually having to work on it. And they're all completely wrong. If you do magic correctly, that's exactly the opposite of what it is. What makes a really great magic system great is that it has rules and boundaries and consequences. So when you are setting up a magic system, you have to know your limits, and there are all different kinds of limits. The truly interesting part of any magic system is not what it can do, but what it can't do. If you have a book where someone just has open wishes and they get to do anything they want, then it actually is less interesting. Even in like Aladdin, which is the ultimate, I have a genie, I can have all the wishes story. The first thing that the genie says is that there are some limitations on the wishes, and he sets up the rules for the things that you can and can't do. So when you're setting up any kind of a magic system, you have to have some hard and fast rules, and they should have something to do with the plot. We'll get into that a little more later. Because if you have just an open magic system where anything can happen and you can make anything you want, do anything you want, it actually completely takes away your narrative tension, and it becomes less interesting. So the more your magic can do, the less interesting it is. And it's like the magical paradox. So these limitations should be a mix of obvious and counterintuitive. So there should be things that obviously you can and can't do. So like, for example, in Harry Potter, all of the magic that they do has an incantation, and you have to have like a wand movement and an intent. And so it's obvious that you have to learn all the spells, you have to learn the recipes for the potions, etc. And then as you read through it, you find out things that are less obvious. Like, for example, that Mrs. Weasley can't just like create food from nothing. She has to transform or create or use her spells to turn one thing into another, etc. You can't just break totally break the laws of physics. So you should have a mix of obvious and counterintuitive limits to your magic. And that gives you a balance. So the benefits of your magic should be no more than equal to its downfalls. And actually, the best magic systems, the benefits are less than the downfalls, because then it makes your character have to have kind of a difficult choice when they're using their magic. The downfalls might not be directly magical. There might be consequences. For example, if you have someone who has magical powers, but they have to hide it so that they're not shunned by friends or hunted down by the government, that's not a magical consequence, but it is a consequence of having the magic. So whatever your magic is, it should have downfalls. It shouldn't all be sparkly and roses. There should be a logical reason why your character might wish they had never so much as heard of magic, much less be thoroughly involved. And I wanted to open up to you guys. I know you have a Q&A thing. What are some examples that you can think of in any of your books where there are consequences that maybe might make the characters wish that they didn't have magic? Oh, I clicked. Sorry, I clicked, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. One of my favorite examples of downfalls of magic is a direct magical consequence. And this is a book by an author named Natalie Whipple, who, quite frankly, I never think gets quite enough credit for her books. But she has a book about witches called The House of Ivy and Sorrow. And in her books, in order to create any kind of magic, her witches have to sacrifice a part of their body that is relatively equal to the magic that they're trying to do. So like if you're just trying to do a little bit of magic, you might get away with just snipping off a piece of your fingernail or yanking out a couple of strands of hair. But if you're trying to do big magic, it might require the tip of your finger or some of the skin off of your foot or some of the blood out of your body. And she has one character in particular that trades their entire little finger for a particular work of magic. So not only is there always a price, but the bigger the magic, the bigger the price. Whereas in like Harry Potter, there aren't as many, there aren't inherent magical downfalls. You don't pay prices for having created spells, but there are a lot of emotional downfalls. Harry Potter loses his parents in the magical war. And then he becomes part of this war where he has secret enemies as well as secret friends. So there are a lot of emotional downfalls. If he had just never been born in the wizarding world, there are ways in which his life would be better. And so he has emotional prices there. Someone says, I love the Holly Black Cruel Prince books where it's potentially terrible to live in fairy. And that's a really excellent example. And someone says, I just read that series by Harkness, and there is a lot of struggle about whether magic is a benefit or not. And I'm not familiar with that series, but that sounds like exactly what we're talking about here. Thank you, guys. There can be physical downfalls. Wake, Fade, and Gone by Lisa McMann. She mostly writes middle grade now, but she started out with this series, and it has one of the most interesting magic systems I've ever really come across. And essentially, her characters are dream walkers, but the more that they use their powers, it actually degrades them physically. They lose their sight. They lose their sense of touch. They essentially just their entire body like breaks down the more that they use their magic. And it's like they age faster. Like by the time they're 30, their bodies are broken down like they're 100. And there's no going back on that. And so that one has major physical downfalls that aren't necessarily directly related to the magic, but from using their magic. So the point is with all of this is that you want the magic to not just be this beautiful, sparkly gift of awesomeness, even if the characters think it is at the beginning. There has to be consequences that would make them, at least for a moment, wonder, is it worth it at all to have this? Do I wish that maybe I didn't? So the second part is that you need to match your magic. Often when I see brand new aspiring authors' works and stories, their magic system tends to be one of two things: the equivalent of sprinkles or a thinly veiled copy. And when I say the equivalent of sprinkles, I mean that they have a fully rounded story and then they've added magic like you're throwing sprinkles on a cupcake. So it's not really a part of the story. Like you could take the magic completely away and the story would still be fine, which means that your magic isn't really integrated into your plot. Or you read it and you're like, oh, this is like Harry Potter, but in Asia. Or, oh, this is like Star Wars, but in the past, So if your magic system is essentially Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Harry Potter, it's okay. But recognize that you're practice story. And that's fine. This is also one of the really great things, if you like to write fan fiction, is it's a great way to get practice and to learn how to build characters and to work within a world and to be creative with magic, even if it's somebody else's magic system. Just recognize that it's practice and that eventually you're going to have to come up with your own original thing, which is hard. When you're ready to write an original magic system, you need to make sure your magic system isn't just sprinkles. Your magic system should match your characters and your setting and your world. They should all be integrated enough together that if you took out any of those, the story would fall apart. So some examples are Harry Potter as a story literally could not exist without its magic. And it literally could not exist without its setting. And you could potentially swap out some of the characters, but then you'd have to make them fulfill some of the roles that the other characters did. You can't just take, Hermione out and have the story work, not even necessarily the main character. If you take any of the main-ish characters out, your story would fall apart. And that's actually what you want. You want them to all be so embedded that they can't just be taken out. The ones in Future Witches, they live in an alternate Salem. That sounds amazing. But I imagine that author has like this whole, kind of different story that goes along with that. Like retellings and stuff like that, you totally can do that. You just have to kind of put your own original spin on it. I'm going to have to check that out. Hex Hall is by Rachel Hawkins. And I put it on here because it's also a magical school book like Harry Potter is. So they have similar settings, except that hers is like a magical reform school. And she has every kind of magical creature you could imagine. She's got fairies and vampires and werewolves and zombies and ghosts, and she's got all of these sorcerers, all of these different kinds of creatures. So she's using mythos that already exists. We already know what these different kinds of magical creatures are. She hasn't reinvented the wheel, but by putting them all together in the same setting and bouncing their powers off of each other and then tweaking some of them for her own use, all of a sudden she has taken familiar magic, made it into her own, meshed it into a setting, and then cast it with her own characters. So you can use, you don't have to come up with something whole cloth on your own. You don't have to come up with something completely different. And same thing with Twilight. You've got the vampire, which, you know, everybody's familiar with the vampire. And then Stephanie Meyer put her own twist on it. And then she particularly really focused on her characters, and her characters more than anything else are what bring that particular series alive. But you take any of those, the setting, the characters, the magic out, and all of those series just fall apart. So it should be really, really integral in your world. I'm grabbing some questions as I go. I hope that that's not distracting to anyone. But one of the attendees says, I love fan fiction. Do authors like that or resent it? And certainly that's something that I've heard of a few authors who resent it, but 99% of authors think it's fantastic. They love it. Often they won't read it because they don't want to be accidentally stealing anything from you for their own books. But I love it when people, fan fiction, fan art, I love it. Love it, love it, love it. So with your magic and your characters, you want your magic to match your characters. And so you need to think, what sort of character would your magic system naturally create? And you're going to look at your world and your setting, and you're going to answer questions like, does everyone have magic? Like in Harry Potter, not everyone in England has magic, but everyone at Hogwarts has magic, unless you're, oh shoot, I've forgotten the word. Unless you're a squib. My 16-year-old son is over there feeding me the answers. Unless you're a squib, everyone has magic, but you hide it when you're in England because not everybody in England has magic. In my Wings series, for example, Laurel is the only fairy she knows of in California. She's in California, in the human world, until she meets others who live in their own area. Does your character have to hide? If you have a character who's openly magical, they're going to develop different quirks regarding their magical abilities than someone who has to hide. And it might change even their personality. If you have someone with magical abilities that has to hide all the time, they're going to get shy to cover it, or maybe they're going to be really gregarious, so that if they accidentally use their magic, someone will just think that they're messing around and pulling a practical joke. But that's going to inform their character. So do they have to hide? Does everyone have magic? Are they trying to stand out with their magical powers? What are the dangers? Or do they live in a world where if someone finds out that they have magic, they're going to be punished or studied or put to death or made a slave? Or, you know, or are they just, well, now you're accepted because now you have magic? So what kind of dangers or rewards does the magic have in your world? How does it affect their daily lives? One of the funnest things that I think about the Harry Potter, the differences between, for example, when Harry goes to visit the Weasleys and when he's with his own family, the differences with having magic as just part of your daily life versus totally not. You know, the Dursleys have no magic in their lives, but the Weasleys use their magic for everything from setting the table to going to bed. And how long have they known that they have magic? Do you have someone who's just discovered magic and so they're finding out the lengths that their magic can go, the different things their magic can do? Or are they just learning about it and they are, or have they had it the whole time and so they know it inside and out? Their parents have been teaching them since the beginning. So all of this is going to affect how your character develops, and your character and their magic should match. Your magic should also suit your world, even if that world is a present day Earth that we're familiar with. It ought to fit in somehow. This was something that I had a challenge with when I was writing my Wings series, is that I had to figure out how my plant magic would fit in a modern world. And a very, very small example of this is that A person who has plant cells instead of animal cells and isn't warm-blooded would have trouble using the screen on a smartphone. And so eventually when I have one of my characters using a smartphone, they get very frustrated because the screen doesn't react as well. So these are little things that are fun to throw in, but even if they don't make it into the text, these are things that you need to think about. If you're creating an entirely new world, your magic has to match even more intricately. It's going to be a big part of how your entirely new world is created. Some examples of this are Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson and Throne of Glass and the Grisha trilogy. These are all completely created worlds that are formed by a lot of very far-reaching magic. And the way that the world is created, the way that the governments are created, the way that the culture runs, the way that the characters are brought up is all very much wrapped around the magic that they've created. So one of the questions here is, what's a good way to figure out these things or write them down so that we have a well-rounded story? And a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about is not going to make it onto the page. It's going to be things that you have to think about. There are so many plant facts that I know about my plant fairies in my Wings series that have never made it into the book, because I would have chapters upon chapters of botany facts that I think are cool, but that would be really boring to just stick into the story. But I would handwrite a lot of these things and then keep them in a pile by my computer where I was writing. And if I wanted to add something fun in, I'd kind of look through the different things that I'd brainstormed and written down and find a fun one. So whether you like to write things down on the computer or on paper, pen and paper, just write them down in a separate document, just facts and fun things. Go ahead and write things down, even if you don't think that they're going to make it into the story, and you might surprise yourself. Another little question in there, since I'm talking about Wings, is there anything I'd change about the magic system of the series if I wrote it nowadays? And I don't think I would. I did a lot of research into botany when I was writing Wings, and I'm pretty pleased with the magic system as is. I like to think it holds up pretty well. And most of the things that I think about that I wanted to add in, I added into my 5th book, Arabesque, that just came out a few years ago. And I got to kind of just add some fun things that were just for fans who were into the world anyway. So that was fun. Okay, so when you're thinking about your magic, you need to think about what your world needs. Kind of to explain that a little more is, do you have a world where like the culture is crumbling and the government is crumbling like a dystopia? Or do you have a world where everything is pretty stable and actually you kind of want to hide the magic so that you're not creating chaos? So what does your world need from your magic, including the answer to that can be nothing. And what would the consequences be if your world lost its magic? And again, if you have a character who is hiding their magic, the answer might be nothing. But if you have a world like Harry Potter or in Mistborn, where there would be vast consequences if the magic suddenly disappeared. Some of these are going to relate to your writing more, and some of them, the answer is going to be not much. Next, because every story is going to have its own needs, but you're going to want to think about each of these questions and just know what the answers are in your head. So what would the consequences be if your world lost its magic? Do the citizens of the world know how close they are to destruction, or how far they are, or are they complacent? Are they just ignorant of the fact at all? For example, like at the end of Twilight, when they're about to have this like huge war, everyone outside of the magical group of vampires and werewolves, is completely oblivious to the fact that anything is happening. And so they had no idea. And was it going to affect the rest of the world? No, but it was going to be devastating to the magical world. And does your magic empower or enslave, or some of both? And hopefully it's some of both to go along with those magical consequences. But for example, there are often magical systems where the person who has a specific type of magic is then destined to be a ruler or destined to be a servant of the people. So whatever magic that you end up having decides your role in life. And so that's what I mean. Like, does your magic enslave? Does it make you have a role, or does it put you in a position where you're expected to serve? And probably it does some of both, but you at least need to know the answer to that. So the other thing that you can have is when you go a little bit more into the sci-fi realm, when technology is your magic system. And for example, Cinder by Marissa Meyer, the main character in Cinder is part, I don't know that robot is the right word, but she's part constructed. Like her foot is an actual technological attachment. So sometimes, especially in sci-fi, your technology is the equivalent of your magic system. So when you're doing that, you need to answer some of the same questions that you do with actual magic. But the first one is that your technology should make sense. The reader should be able to see how you got from today's technology to whatever technology is in your book. It should seem like it's at least possible in the future. One of the things that Star Trek was really famous for is that even with all of the kind of technobabble that everybody would be rattling off while they were steering the ship, if you really broke it down, there was some scientific basis and technological basis to the things. Even things like traveling at light speed and jumping through wormholes, these were theoretical physics. And so even though it's not something we can do now, there are scientific theories that lead to the possibility of doing that in the future. Whether or not that ever comes to pass, you can see a path by which your technology is at least possible in the future. That being said, don't over-explain, because if you can really completely, fully explain it, then why doesn't it exist now? And if you're writing a sci-fi that's supposed to be set 100 years in the future, and all of their technology is basically what we have now, that also feels unrealistic, because we know that technology just advances. So don't over-explain, because if you're doing your technology right, you can't. So lay a little bit of groundwork, and probably you should know a little bit more about how you get from point A, which is our technology now, to point B, which is your technology in your book. You're going to know more about that path than you actually want to put into the book. I have a section of glitter that used to be 3 pages long, and every round with my editor, we would cut it in half. Until finally it ended up being 1 page long. And there's this tongue-in-cheek comment after that page where my character literally turns to the person she's talking to and says, "Am I boring you?" And my editor was like, "Do you want to put this in there?" And I was like, yes, I do. But we kept having to make it shorter because I was over explaining. So even I had to learn that after 10 books. Technology can get you into trouble, but it shouldn't be a magic wand that gets you out of trouble. So just like with your magic, you can't use your technology to just make everything happen as though you're waving a magic wand. It should get in your way as much as it helps you get out of trouble. Like the hoverboards Back to the Future 2. I don't know if I'm totally dating myself here, but he's got this hoverboard and it gets him away from the bullies. But then he starts going over this big pond and he doesn't realize that hoverboards don't go over water. So he's gotten away from his bullies so far, and then he gets stuck because he didn't know enough about the technology. And then it just gets him, wet in the pond. So your technology should get you both in trouble and out of trouble. And because I like my own books, I'm going to tell you a bit about my technology in glitter, because this is my first foray into sci-fi. So this was my time where I had to use my technology as though it were a magic system. And there was a bit of a learning curve there because technology is not my forte. And I had to run a lot of things by my husband, like how cloud servers work. And he did a lot of explaining in very small words to me. So M.A.R.I.E, which, oh man, it's been too long since the mainframe of autonomic. I used to know this acronym. It's an acronym. It's an acronym with very, very big words in it, but they call her M.A.R.I.E, and she is the Palace of Versailles smart house mainframe. So the Palace of Versailles is a smart house, and it tends to get in the way instead of actually helping my main character out. But that road between smart houses that we have now and the fully functioning smart house that they have in glitter is how I got my little road from here to there. So some of the technology in the book that we're already headed for is they have lenses, contact lenses that they use to connect to the internet. And it's actually really interesting. While I was writing glitter, I got selected to be part of the Google Glass Explorers program, which has since become completely defunct. But it was where they had it was like a headband and it had a little cube here. So it kind of looked like you were wearing glasses, except there was a little tiny screen over here. And it was supposed to be the next big thing. And people really didn't like it. But the direction we were headed at that point was wearable internet connection close to your eyes. And if I were writing this book again now, I think I would do more of technology that you wear on your wrist, because that's the direction that we've taken since then. So I've already seen some of the technology directions change since writing this book, which has been very interesting. They have robots in glitter, and it is just very, very a lot farther advanced than the robots we have now. But we're already working on that, and you can see the smart robots that they're making now. And so I just took that to a far advanced step. Smart houses is something that we're developing now, and again, I just took that very far. And self-driving cars have actually come quite a way since glitter came out, and they are really perfected in this book, which is set about 100 years in the future. So there's some technology that we have that I just took quite a bit down the road when I was writing glitter, because I wanted you to be able to see where it started. So Ali says, I love it when, maybe it's Ali, sorry. I love it when books add AI robots that act like personal butlers in their plot. Have you ever done that? That totally is in glitter. All of their servants are bots, because they learned from the French Revolution that you don't want to have a high aristocracy and a servant class living together. So they have the high aristocracy, but all of their servants are bots who aren't going to rebel against them. And then I also added in, because I wanted my technology to not be a magic wand, abuses of technology that are a barrier to my character getting what her goals are. And one is that it's very easy to spy on people with that much technology. So she has to do a lot of getting around the technology that runs the smart house, but also is very easy to surveil her. So it's very hard to sneak around when there are cameras everywhere, cameras and sensors and motion detectors. So it's very, very difficult to really have privacy when you live surrounded by so much technology. And that's something that Danica really has to deal with. And then entrapment, it's very easy to entrap people into doing what you need them to do by threatening them with technology when all of your bank accounts, for example, are digital and someone can hack into your bank account and drain it. That's going to be a major problem. And so one of the things that Danica has to do is that she changes everything that she's using to cash, because nobody can hack cash. And so hacking is a big deal in here. And actually, she does a fair amount of hacking as well. So technology in sci-fi is has a lot of the same rules as magic, because I mean, by making it in the future, you get to kind of turn your technology into magic. All right, so wrap up on some of this, and then I'm gonna let you guys ask questions either about the presentation or about other general things. Remember that it's okay to write someone else's magic system. Fan fiction is a really good way to get your feet wet and to learn how to write in long form and to learn how to be creative with a magic system. It's good practice. Just remember that when you're ready to pursue publication, you need to start from scratch. You want to be writing your own original stuff if you're going to be pursuing publication. The first original magic system you create will probably also be for practice. It probably won't really fit together as a cohesive whole. This certainly was the case for me. I wrote several books before I ever got published. And even the ones that I went back and did a lot of rewriting and eventually finished them, there was much revamping of the magic system to make it work. And again, that's okay. Writing for writing's sake is really important. That's how you get your practice. Your magic should be essential to your world, and your world should be essential to your magic. Everything should fit together like a glove, that you can't separate the two, or else your story falls apart. No just flinging sprinkles onto a cupcake and saying, look, it's magic. Your characters should have been shaped by their magic or lack thereof, and they should be uniquely situated or uniquely suited to their own personal magic, whatever it is. Technology is its own kind of magic, and you need to follow the same kinds of rules. All of the questions that you ask yourself about your magic system, you should also ask yourself about technology. Here are some really, really excellent examples of people that are just absolute masters of crafting magic systems. As you read these, remember that not only are these people really, really fantastic, but their books have also been through an entire editing process with a team. So don't read, for example, The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare and be like, I could never do anything that vast and wide. And because she's got this huge, huge world. She didn't write that all in one go either. You know, she ate that whale one bite at a time, so to speak. So don't look at some of these people and think I could never do that, because at one point they couldn't do it either. You do little bits at a time. If anybody wants this list from me, if you want to take a screenshot, that's totally fine. If you want it from me later, feel free to find me on Twitter. I'm happy to send you a screenshot of it. In fact, maybe I'll just put this up on Twitter. Because authors love being recommended. So I'm sure everybody would be happy to be on that list. And this is just going to be the background for Q&A because it's my book and it's pretty and I like it. So I've got a couple of questions up here. Do you think you do another seminar like this? I really enjoyed it. Good, because it's hard to know when I can't see people's faces whether or not people are enjoying it. One of the great things about Zoom is that you can be anywhere and do a thing like this for anyone. And for all you know, I might not be wearing pants. Doesn't matter. You can just do a thing. So yeah, I would totally do another thing like this. I think you're currently writing an adult fantasy book, if I'm correct. How is that going? I'm writing so many things right now. Actually, the next thing that I am coming out with is a paranormal romance series. It's a lot like Wings, except that it is Dragons, and I'm so excited for it, and that will be out later this summer. The first book is called Heat, and I will very much spread the word about it on Twitter as soon as I have a cover, which should be in the next month or so, and I'm super excited about that. That one is a YA. It's going to have very much the same feel to it as my Wings series. I do have an adult fantasy that is like on the back burner and has been for several years. My first book is done, but not edited yet. So I'm still working on that. Do I tell people my ideas for a story before or during the writing, or do you get a story written first before sharing? There is a very small handful of people I will tell an idea to, and that's like my husband and my mother. But beyond that, I like to at least get a big chunk of the writing done before I tell people about it, because I have to get about 100 pages into a book before I'm convinced it's a big enough idea to be a book. So probably not before, unless you're one of those very special people. Do I recommend taking writing classes before writing a full draft of a book? I got a bachelor's in English, but regular writing classes would be different for sure. Yes and no. If you haven't taken any writing classes, I highly recommend taking one. But if you have a bachelor's in English, you probably have most of the tools that you need. The problem with college writing classes is that they are focused on short stories, because it is just too difficult to be expected to write an entire novel in one semester. Even if that was the only class you were taking. And so a lot of the things that you learn in a short story writing class do transfer over to a novel writing class. But the best way to learn how to write a novel is to write a really bad first novel. And we all do it. We all write a really bad first novel. So if you haven't taken a writing class, I do recommend. If you already have a degree in English, if you want to, go ahead, but you probably already have the tools that you need. I think that reading books at that point is actually a better way to learn how to put a story together than actually taking a writing class that will essentially teach you how to write a short story. Oh, hey, good. It was fun. I'm glad. What makes adult fantasy different from fantasy for teenagers? A lot of that is going to be obviously the age of the main character, but on top of that, the motivation of the main character. If you have a character that's on the verge of being an adult, but they are, looking at finding someone to marry and having a career and preparing to live the rest of their adult life, you might be heading more into adult fantasy. But if you have a teenage character who is dealing with the here and now, teenage fantasy is very immediate. It's more about how do I get through today and next month and maybe next year, rather than how do I lay down the path for the rest of my life, which is kind of more of an adult thing. 90% of the time, the age of your protagonist is going to tell you whether it's teen or adult. But when in doubt, look at, are they planning for the now, or are they trying to get ready for the rest of their life? Is it hard for you to juggle writing several stories / worlds at the same time? I have gotten better at it over the years. When I started needing to write one book, and then turn around and do edits on a previous book, which is how deadlines work in publishing, is that you're drafting a new book and then you have to stop and do edits on the old book. And when that was between series, I had to learn how to kind of switch it in my brain. And once I learned how to do it, it's something that I now am totally okay switching back and forth with. So I don't mind writing different kinds of books. Right now, I am actually writing a space set sci-fi with a friend of mine, while I am also working on a teen paranormal romance set on Earth that's contemporary. And they're just completely different feels, completely different worlds. And it's refreshing to switch back and forth. But it is something that I had to learn how to do. And once I learned how to do, I really liked it. My favorite books right now, this is going to be the most disappointing answer ever. Right now, I'm mostly reading a lot of thrillers. I'm really enjoying psychological thrillers right now, which has nothing to do with magic. And I go through like genre, uh, where I'll read a lot of books of the same genre at one time, and I won't really get out of that genre. I went through a big historical fiction binge for a while, and I just read all historical fiction. Um, and then before that, it was just all YA all the time. So it depends. Um, right now, like I said, I'm reading a lot of thrillers, and I read enough that I don't even think about who the authors are sometimes. Um, I will say that I really love Lisa Unger's books. Her books are very cerebral, and she tends to have characters that are everywhere from 80-year-old women to 50-year-old men to 16-year-old girls. And she really gets into their heads in a way that makes them feel very believable to me. So I really like her. She writes particularly a series set in the Hollows, which is different than the Hollows that Kim Harrison's series. That's a contemporary alternate reality paranormal, but they're both called the Hollows. Would you ever write poetry if you haven't already? I will tell you, I am a terrible poet. I took a poetry class in college, and I did well in it because I tried, not because my poetry was good, but because I always turned in my assignments and there was effort involved. I'm a terrible poet. My husband is actually a really excellent poet, and he does this thing with internal rhymes where there are words in the middle that rhyme and diagonals, and he's amazing. And he writes me a poem every year on our anniversary. But I am an abysmal poet. I'm a terrible poet, and I haven't really tried to write poetry since college when I had to. What movies would you say have the best magic system? I am super, super attached to The Prestige, which has one completely realistic magic trick and one supernatural magic trick, and they intersect. And it's really fantastic. And I'm not going to say anything beyond that because the revelation is half of the awesomeness of the movie. But I like the intersection of reality and supernatural where it pulls both of them in. And The Prestige really scratches that itch for me. Do you think character names matter much in books with magical settings, and how do you go about choosing names? I do, and every author I know is super attached to their characters' names. And there are different ways to do that. In Wings, all of my fairies in Avalon have either names that I feel like are very magical sounding, like Tammany, or they have plant names, like Laurel's name is a plant. And there are a lot of flower names and floral names and nature names. And I did that very purposely. I have a book that I'm working on. It's my adult fantasy. It's my back burner book. And the the eventual trilogy has two different parts of a world in it, and one part of the world is very ground oriented, and so I have characters named Slate and Flint and what's another good one there, but they're very ground and wood, and I have a guy named Gear. And then the other part of the world is very air and water and plant. And so they're the names there. I haven't started on that, so I don't have any set in stone names there, but I'm going to have names like Terra. And I really want a good wind name. I'll probably have a character named Mariah from the Broadway song about the wind being called Mariah. And so the names are not always super important, but sometimes they really are. And the other thing is, if you're naming your characters in a contemporary world, like the names that were popular with the kids that I went to school with are kind of dated now. You don't see a lot of Jessicas and Ambers anymore. What you see are a lot of Sophies and Bellas. And so if you look up most popular names for whatever year your main character would have been born, then you'll see what names your readers are actually going to see in their classrooms. Like when about 5 or 6 years ago, like half of the teenagers, girls and boys, were named something that rhymed with Aiden. There was, Caden and Peyton and Jaden, and there were all of these Aiden names. And there was something in the water during that time where everybody's name rhymed with Aiden. And so you do research on the internet for stuff like that. But yes, names, very, very important, even if no one sees the importance to them except you. Would I ever do a virtual book signing? I'm not sure how that would work though. Yes, but I'm not sure how that would work. I haven't done one, so I don't know how that works. But if I knew how it worked, I totally would.
All right, April Lynn, that covers all of the questions that we had coming in. So now is a good time, I think, for us to announce our prizes. What do you think, April Lynn?
Sounds good. All right.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. That was
and some
very
really great
informative.
questions there. That Q&A box, I think, worked really well. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone, for participating. It's easy to feel like you're talking to an empty room. So thank you very much.
So I'm just very glad that we had questions too. And I'm going to pull up, I'm going to share my screen if it'll let me. So I can show you guys our prizes. Share. All right. Do you guys, I don't know what you see. So our first prize is this Teen Titans poster, the one on the right. So not that one. That didn't work. The one on the right. And the winner of that is Fianna, Fianna. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that.
I like that name.
And
that's nice.
I don't know what last name, so Fianna. I'm going to put in the chat box after I finish sharing my screen an email, but if you are a prize winner, please email libraryprograms@cityofmissionviejo.org, and we will work out how to give you your prizes. Our copy of Surfside Girls, which is written by tomorrow's panelist, Kim Dwinell. This goes to Anna Nobile. Anna Nobile. Again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering any names. And then our copy of Shatter by our very own April Lynn Pike will go to Leela Bernstein. Leela Bernstein. So if I've called your name, please email us at libraryprograms. I'm going to put that in the chat at cityofmissionviejo.org. Also, in case you guys didn't realize, we do partner with some local small independent bookstores. So I'm also putting in the chat box a link to Creating Conversations, where you can actually purchase books from April Lynn. You can purchase books from Kim Dwinell and from some of our other presenters. So please check it out and support our fabulous authors. With that said, you can use the same link to log in tomorrow for Kim's presentation on local research and how she applies it to her graphic novels. So with that said, it looks like we might have a few other questions. Oh, just lots of thanks. Thank you so much, April Lynn.
Thank you. You guys.
I will second that. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time, especially since you're in Florida, so it's a little late for you. I'm going to give you a plug. Follow her on Twitter. I put the link in the chat room. She's fantastic on Twitter, and she posts some really cool videos of her paddleboarding. So
sea turtles and sharks.
You should check that out, and very scary jellyfish.
Yes, jellyfish.
So thank you, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you all tomorrow. And thank you very much, April Lynn.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good night.